So gentlemen, we talked about COVID and how it's been a little bit of an impediment, but we've really overcome that. An earlier question asked by one of the audience members, Ryan Keller, and kind of Steve, to your point of building a startup within the bureaucracy, what impediments and challenges have you guys seen with implementing agile practices, given the culture that we all work in and the bureaucratic nature of it, and how have you resolved them?
Question. Impediments?
Impediments or challenges you guys have seen in implementing agile practices in each of your respective domains?
Mac, I can jump on that one if I just start off. So I'd say I'm going to use the same quote again, is creating a crisis, because I work at 2nd Maintenance Battalion right now. You know, things weren't necessarily for the products that we were trying to produce. Nothing was necessarily wrong with what we were doing. Our processes are efficient. People are pretty good at what they do. But to tell them that they could be better, I kind of had to frame it in the what is wrong, how could we be better, before that people were willing, like, to create that buy-in, that space of willing to reevaluate the way we do things in order to get after change and being better. A great thing for me that helped wake me up to the fact that we could be better was the Commandant's planning guidance. That strategic level guidance was really good for me as far as getting me focused on that. But then I really had to focus hard and make people see the problem set the way I did, or not necessarily the way I did, but just awake them to the fact that we could be better, and that just because we were good at doing it the same way doesn't mean that there's not a better way. So I guess creating buy-in is essentially what I'm talking about.
I think for us at McTissa and the Innovation Center in general, but the AI cell in particular, it was that, you know, when your charter is to, you know, look at third ridgeline technologies, you know, current emerging tech that can support the warfighter, those things that our engineers, our testers will have to support in the future, you know, and then have no requirement to point to say that, you know, either internally or externally, you know, hey, help me to you know, take a look at artificial intelligence, machine learning. You know, even though there's no operational 3-star commander that's saying you need to do that, right? So that's kind of been the biggest hurdle for us. But again, you know, and to Aaron's point, you know, storytelling, right? Like you know, trying to explain to people why they should be helping you or why they should be changing is critical in this whole thing.
Some of our experience as we talk to people across the force has been that it's tough to put, and this is building actually on each of the preceding points, it's tough to put words on the urgency of a reason if it doesn't come from above. We had a couple of the panelists in the first hour who touched on this. You know, it's not the boss telling you to do it, Colonel Shelton said. You don't need somebody 2 levels up to give you the mission. In an agile world, you got to find your missions elsewhere. And especially, you know, in garrison, at home, in enterprise moments and places and organizations, we sort of expect the mission to come down from above. And learning to think, first of all, who depends on me? Aren't they really the reason that I come to work every day? And sometimes it's people you meet every day, and sometimes it's end users down the road who depend on the stuff that you're putting together and somebody else is going to license or produce or acquire. But learning to ask, like, what do they need from me and how do they not have it if I don't do the things that I know I'm supposed to do for this mission? How do I get them in the room so that I can look them face to face and ask them, am I doing the right thing for you, or is this actually putting gum in your gears? And if it's the gum in the gears one, thank you for telling me, and how do I make that better? And once they tell you, you're failing them, which we all are, we're imperfect human beings, we got to make choices and we're all learning as we go. But once we find out about them and we know that the people who depend on us need something from us, that's a real good reason to find ways around the impediments that come from waiting for hire to tell you. Or I think there's a more conservative interpretation of that authorizing regulation that we could abide by and it'd be safer. Well, yeah, maybe it would be, but are we failing somebody as we do it? And how do we balance those things? And once you start asking yourselves those questions, making yourself, I had an old instructor who used to say, you gotta look the black dog in the eye if you're scared at night. Go find it and unflinchingly come to account with what you need to do about it. And if you make yourself do that, which again, Scrum is pretty good at routinizing that habit, everything else follows, because we all care deeply about the people who depend on us and the mission for which we've all been put in the same place.
So on that, John, I think one thing you said, like the question is, how do you get someone in the room to talk about it? I'd say the emphasis should be on how do you get in their room to talk about it with them? We've seen a lot of success in just building collaboration by just showing up. I was out in Okinawa working with 3MEF in terms of how we can provide better support from our contractors out there. And one of the questions came up, like, how can we do more with the CTCs, the communications training centers, to just build better collaboration? So me and my site lead, literally, we didn't call ahead. We drove over there and ended up talking for an hour with the director over there and came up with a plan of attack right then and there. So I think a lot of people want to be more agile. They want things to happen, but it's down to you individually to get in there and talk with people and propose new solutions, and they're often very open to it.
I want to ride on that for a second, if it's okay, Adrian. Something that Ryan Keller and I talk a lot about is how adaptable warfighter-centered design really is. I mean, I was kind of shocked leaving the course at all the different examples that were presented to us on how to. I mean, we've implemented warfighter-centered design in Scrum to, I mean, just some really, really cool stuff, right? Like the renovation and modernization of our lab, to our tactical machine learning project, to our automated read board generator. I mean, we've used warfighter-centered design to do after action, post-mortem on events at the command, and so that getting in the room and having those discussions, but also encouraging folks to dedicate some time sending their people to the courses, right? I mean, again, we were kind of wandering the desert on our project, had an idea of what we wanted to do, and we were, kind of plugging along, but we were, sometimes just kind of on the beach screaming at the waves, trying to stop them from coming in. Warfighter-centered design, Scrum, military Scrum Master, those courses unlocked the path for us.
I find a lot of benefit in it from a software engineering perspective as we meet with customers or warfighters who are looking to, they have a pot of money, or they have a desire or a need, and it helps us to turn that into actual requirements that we can do development from. So as the greater community takes on more of these types of principles, even if we all aren't functioning the exact same way in-house or within each individual team, to have a common language, a common understanding that we can talk to, I think will go a long way, especially in helping, for example, civilians who may not have any military experience be able to meet with those warfighters and build out requirements and build products that they want to use, that they find effective and efficient, and we can continue to iterate on those ideas until we have, can continue to pull in the same direction to get to perfection, whatever that looks like as it relates to building quality tools. And we always talk about, at the end of the day, we don't want to build tools or products that look like they were made by the government. So I know that those are our goals as a software engineering branch. And I think these types of discussions and these interactions will go a long ways in helping us bridge those gaps that we currently have, trying to meet industry standard when it comes to providing quality to the warfighter.
One more thing that just popped in my mind as as the discussions that we have within the McTISA AI cell, and Jen with the truth bombs and the all the nice comments that she's making on the side here is one of the things I think is scary for a lot of people that maybe looking at this as, man, these guys have done so much work and it's so hard and look at all the effort they put into it. The buy-in, like the initial cash in to using warfighter-centered design, Scrum, seems daunting at first. Even leaving the courses, it seemed daunting. But man, I mean, the very minimal amount of effort it takes to, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, implement these practices at your command, pay you dividends down the road. I mean, I was looking at 3 hours of sprint review and retrospective and planning per 2-week sprint. When you look at that across an 80-hour work week, 80-hour work week, right? It's not that much, man. I mean, we benefit tremendously from doing all the pre-planning up front. And so I would just offer to the 123 folks still watching, dedicate some time, send your people to these courses, and then allow them to do the planning, the reviews, the retrospectives, all of the events that Scrum requires, and you'll see the benefits the same way that all the panelists here do.
At first, it's painful, and especially if you have a larger team, and people on the team may have been in this organization for a long time, and they're set in their ways. There's a big thing to say that Scrum is self-organizing, self-selecting. So when we stood up, we didn't force anyone to use Scrum, but it was the main way that the leadership was going to communicate. And it took probably about 2 full months for it to take hold. But now, especially when we moved into this crisis, it wasn't a question of do we continue Scrum. It was how do we continue to do operations, of which Scrum is how we do operations now.
I think to go along with that too, that's the transparency piece. So having the formalized communication within the Scrum, having the transparency, each individual kind of gets to establish their own voice. So, they may have areas that they feel confident in, they're stronger in, they can shine through in those areas. And then as the team, everybody kind of finds the holes and tends to speak up, kind of like us on the panel here today. We kind of find where there's areas where we need to speak up, we can add to that conversation. So I think that the stand-ups is a good piece, but for us, I think it's transparency in the team. And then beyond that, we have, being part of a matrix organization, program offices, the fleet, we want to provide transparency to all those folks that are stakeholders in our project. So where we can do that adds a lot of value.
I think, at least for us in my organization, we have a lot of macro level folks that are making force-wide decisions are each in their individual codes, a lot of time very siloed. When we first tried to introduce these methodologies, it was a big, hey, wait a minute, we've been doing this, we've been making it work. So it was a very, there wasn't a huge reception towards it because of the resistance to change, right? You're asking us to change the way we're doing stuff and adopt something new. We're having force-wide impact. So a different approach that we're working with right now is finding what they're already doing that don't even realize that they're using agile methodologies, right? Like some codes automatically do a morning stand-up meeting, and it's probably 30, 40 minutes long, but if they can condense that down to 15 minutes, well, hey, there you go. You're already started to get into that Scrum methodology, right? And then, hey, why don't we just add a quick simplistic, what do we need to do to this today, right? And who's doing it and who's done with it? And then just little by little start scaling that. And I'm finding small successes in that. And then also targeting the right influencers, right? Very senior and very junior folks. With the junior folks who are very influential, a lot of times the C lawyers, which is great, right? They have a lot of people that they influence, and we can capture them and teach them these things, just fragments, right? Not give them a fire hose full of Scrum and Agile and all these, and design thinking, but just little fragments here and there, start building on them. They'll start to influence their circle. And so you get that meeting from the bottom to the top, and they meet somewhere in the middle where they have this symbiotic relationship where, hey, that actually makes sense because it's familiar. And it starts becoming commonplace for them to start doing that. And before you know it, you're kind of doing a pseudo Scrum. You're kind of doing a sprint. So then we'll come back and reintroduce it in a way that, hey, why don't we formalize this? And by the way, there's this thing you can go to that's called the CAW, and they'll teach you this. So that's what we're trying to hopefully gain some momentum with and start scaling that. Because again, initially where there's a lot of enthusiasm with, hey, we have this great tool, and the challenge was how do you, especially, the folks that are very much set in their ways of doing things, of how do you change them? Or how do you convince them to stop doing what they're doing, how they've been doing it for years, and adopt this new thing that's very unfamiliar to them? So in an absence of having a lot of people that are comfortable with being uncomfortable, there was a lot of resistance to change. So we're hoping that helps build some momentum, and before you know it, it starts compounding. So I think the key there is finding the right influence to start just in small fragments, introducing some of these things without necessarily calling it design thinking or Scrum, because those words tend to be daunting, right? I think somebody used that word daunting earlier. But if we do it on a smaller scale and start building on that, we're starting to see some success with that.
So to kind of build on,
I want to make a quick point about implementation culture that is going to leverage a comment that I heard a moment ago about self-selecting and self-organizing. So we're normally aligned in teams based on a wire diagram that was put through TWIMs or TIFMs or, you know, position descriptions in the hiring process. We're aligned rather arbitrarily is what I'm saying. And what I would say is that beware if you go down the route of self-organizing and self-selecting teams, which, by the way, I think is the only way to achieve hyper-productive agile teams. On the edge of chaos is where high performance happens, right? But to get there, what would you do if tomorrow you walked in and somebody that was in your team yesterday that's connected to you through the wiring diagram said, I think I'm on the wrong team, right? And they said, I think this is not the team I need to be on in order to work on the product that matters. And while this team is doing good work, it's not the work I need to be doing. Because that's exactly actually what happened to me and to my team when we did this. And so to get high-performing teams, a cultural shift needs to happen where autonomy and self-selection happen in a way that that conversation doesn't freak anybody out. I'm not saying that we should violate the rules that we're in, that we should, you know, do anything regulatory, statutory, like all that stuff applies. You got to stay in compliance with it, right? But there is flexibility in the way that we self-organize to get that work done, right? So I'm not talking about who signs your performance reports or, you know, who approves your leave or those sort of administrative functions that are maybe defined. What I'm saying is that high-performing teams are autonomous, and autonomous teams have the ability to organize to get the work done. And so if agility is what we're after, right, we might need some more flexibility around how we manage people and processes in order to get there. And so that comment may have sort of passed over a lot of people that like, oh yeah, self-organizing, self-selecting, but like, no. That means somebody walks into the middle of your daily meeting and says, I'm going to another team and I'm doing it now. And everybody else shakes their hand and wishes them the best. And like, that's the end of it, right? That's the way self-organizing, self-selecting teams work. You don't have to do that, right? But like, that's sort of the vision of where the teams could go. And that's frightening things a lot of times, right? And so there are teams who have done that, right? We just heard from a self-selecting, self-organizing team a moment ago. I just want to make sure it wasn't lost on you that that's an incredible thing and like a huge cultural shift to allow folks to gather around the work in a way that's self-organizing. It's also that's the autonomy that people crave a lot of times. So anyway, maybe a good discussion for you and your teams to have separately.
Yeah, so when we stood up and I made it clear to our team that it was, well, who I thought could possibly be on the team. It was self-organizing, self-selecting. I asked everyone for the first 2 weeks to try it out. Like, hey, come to these meetings, see if it's valuable to you. If you don't think it's valuable, then don't show up anymore. We had one, now we're at two different, within our organization, we've got, 3 different scrums. 2 I'm a part of. One is the Scrum Master. And me and Lucas Burke, initially after we first went to the Scrum course, came back and we had an idea of what we thought the team should look like. And I wouldn't say it's completely off, but they're definitely different. What settled out in terms of how the teams fell out is definitely different than we had first thought. But it works well, and everyone feels like they are working where they need to be to make a difference in the organization, from what I can tell.
Yeah, so general guidance, I'd say, if like you're going to go down this route, if you're kind of at that level where you want to be all in, one of the hardest things you're going to have to figure out for how you're going to do that start is to figure out who your team is. And if you start, once you know who your team is, you've waited much too long. So you need to start in order to do the work to deliver to your customers so that people can identify if that's their work or not. And so I would encourage you to begin before you're certain about who your team is. Because if you waited till you're certain, you spent a lot of time and you probably got it wrong anyway. So don't delay.
I'd say to go along with that, one of the things that we do within our team as well is when we onboard new developers, we kind of allow them to pick which direction they want to go as they look into the issues that are out there. So if it's front-end development, if it's back-end development, if it's system-level design, we kind of let them choose their path initially, and we found that that has led to a lot of success for us, having folks right away provide real value to the team.
If I can actually just answer John's question, what would I do if somebody came to me and said, hey, listen, I'm not on this team anymore. I'm joining this other team. I think I could hold my retirement ceremony at that point. That would be a measure of success for me that I've only dreamed of up to this point. But it also kind of highlights, I think, something that Colonel Shelton was talking about earlier, where, we shouldn't have, innovation cells or centers or teams throughout the Navy and Marine Corps. It should kind of just be pervasive within organizations. Double-edged sword in that, you dedicate a number of people to exist at the edge of your organization, trying to, look forward at those, things that don't exist at the core of the organization. And, that's what that dedicated team is aiming for. But, how do you rotate in or, cultivate innovation or the innovative mindset throughout the organization? And it's something that we've been tackling, trying to figure out here at McTISA for, several months now. We think we have a solution, but I'm just curious, John, Jeremy, what have you found at your organizations? How do you cultivate that mindset throughout a large organization, not just your particular section?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things that I do is if we have folks, fortunately within our project set, we have different types of development work that we can do. So if there's a project that someone's interested in, we can move them around within the branch without having to do a HR action and have them go somewhere else. So that's been beneficial for us. And we've worked to continue to try to diversify the work in the branch to have that availability, especially for software developers, so they can grow and change. And whether it's machine learning or they want to write OS-based software or web development type software or web-based software, they can do that work without having to leave the branch. I think that's been helpful for where we're at getting going. I think overall, from a larger organizational perspective, opportunities like this, where it becomes more, and I use it on a regular basis outside of my immediate structure, is I point back to what is being directed from the flag and SES level in the way of vectors and what are being pushed. And I think that has helped a long way in strengthening ideas that we have for folks that are outside of our immediate organizational structure.
And I would just add to that one quick sort of strategy. Don't worry about changing an enterprise. Worry about changing your team. And if you're good, you will lead your team because they will follow what success looks like. So don't worry about changing people's minds. Demonstrate to them what is possible, and they will follow, and you will become a leader without even trying.